Hello, everyone, and welcome to the very first edition of our Fashioning Sustainability Seminar in the UW, or University of Washington Program on the Environment. My name is Sean McDonald, and I am one of your hosts for the events of this quarter. My co-host, Eli Wheat, is with us. Eli, do you want to say hi?
Hello, everyone. I'm so glad you could make it, and I can't wait to hear today's seminar.
Yeah, for students joining us in the Zoom, I'll ask that you please turn off your cameras for the time being. And then I'll go ahead and introduce, for those folks of you joining us from YouTube land, if you have questions today, you can please use the chat function to add your questions to the chat, and we'll make sure that those get asked. For students in the Zoom with us, thank you for joining us. You can either chat your questions to our panelists, or you can raise your digital hand. I will call on you and you can turn on your camera and ask those questions of our panelists directly. That would be fantastic as well. Just to get us all started, the topic of this quarter is sustainability in fashion and apparel and textiles. We're going to be attacking this question from a number of different angles throughout the quarter. We're going to start we're going to address all aspects of sustainability, whether that's social sustainability or environmental sustainability. We're going to go all the way through the life cycle of these products. So I encourage everyone to stick with us throughout the next 9 weeks or so as we approach these issues with a number of guests. Today, we have a great lineup of guests. We have Elizabeth Cline, journalist and author. She wrote the expose Overdressed, the shockingly high cost of cheap fashion. We have Hilary Jochmans, president of Jochmans Consulting and founder of PoliticallyInFashion. And we have Corey Spencer, co-founder and global sales and PR director of AMENDI brand. So I can, if I could, for the folks in the Zoom with me, let's go ahead and give these folks a nice round of digital applause. We have a digital round of applause for these folks. Thank you so much. I love digital applause. It's almost as good as in-person real applause. There'd be more hooting and hollering, of course, but thank you so much for joining us all. We really do appreciate you taking the time out of your schedules to be part of our panel discussion today. Before we get to the questions, I want to make a brief acknowledgement and then give you a little bit more introductory material on our panelists. So I'd like to start by saying that the University of Washington acknowledges the Coast Salish peoples of this land, the land which touches the shared waters of the tribes and bands within the Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. While we meet today in a digital environment, this virtual platform, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands which we each call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility to improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of the local indigenous peoples and their cultures. So starting with there, I'd like to go ahead now and give you just a little bit of background on each one of our panelists before we begin. As I mentioned, Elizabeth Cline is with us. She's a New York-based author, journalist, and expert on consumer culture, fast fashion, sustainability, and labor rights in the apparel industry. Her critically acclaimed 2012 expose, Overdressed, the shockingly high cost of cheap fashion, was the first to reveal the impact of fast fashion on the environment, economy, and society, and is a founding book of the modern global ethical and sustainable fashion movement. She's a leading expert on this topic and has been interviewed on television and radio by globally recognized news outlets, including Al Jazeera, MSNBC, China Global Television Network, CBC News, the New York Times, and NPR. So thank you, Elizabeth, for joining us today. Let's give her a big round of applause. Digital applause are always great. Our next guest is Hilary Jochmans. She's founder of PoliticallyInFashion and president of Jochmans Consulting, where she works with clients to determine their policy goals in Washington and New York. She focuses on financial services, technology, and economic development in fashion. Hilary has also written on political and regulatory issues of importance to the fashion and retail industry. She's a DC resident, holds a BA from the University of Virginia and a JD from George Washington University School of Law. In addition, she's completed the Fordham Fashion Law Institute Summer Intensive Program. She's an active member of several bar associations, including the New York City Bar Association Fashion Law Committee, where she has organized and spoken on several panels, including wearable technology policy updates and how U.S. fashion companies are addressing problems and overseas garment factories. She's also admitted to the U.S. Supreme Court Bar and the New York State Bar. So thank you very much, Hilary, for joining us as well. Let's give her a big round of digital applause.
Thank you, Sean.
And last but certainly not least, we have Corey Page Spencer, who's co-founder of the transparent and traceable fashion denim brand AMENDI, described by Vogue as raising the sustainability bar. AMENDI, a moniker for amendments, was created with the mission of transforming the fashion industry by making use of the newest sustainable technologies and methodologies. Corey was previously a buyer for the pioneering Manhattan men's boutique Atrium and spent 5 years as the chief executive of Nudie Jeans North American subsidiary, where he oversaw wholesale and retail operations. He is originally from a tiny town in South Carolina, but moved to New York City, where he received degrees in literature from New York University and Columbia University. So thank you to Corey as well for joining us. So a big round of applause for him too. So as a reminder, we've introduced our guests. I'd like to go ahead and give them just a moment just to share with us any of their thoughts. And then we will move on to some questions from our audience here in the Zoom and from those of you on YouTube joining us as well. So please, Elizabeth, you want to go ahead and get us started? Any thoughts you want to share?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everybody. I'm really excited to have this conversation with Corey and Hilary in particular, because, you know, Corey represents the industry side of this conversation. Hilary is an expert in government and policy. And then I have spent the last decade of my life researching the fashion industry and trying to understand how it intersects with the environment and labor rights and all of these other social issues. And the way that the three of us got connected was really over the issue of greenwashing in particular. And when I was working on my second book, The Conscious Closet, The Revolutionary Guide to Looking Good While Doing Good, which came out in 2019, even at that time, people were starting to talk about greenwashing. There was interest in what to do about it, why it was becoming such a pressing problem. And then really just in the last 2 or 3 years, I've seen this question of what is greenwashing? How can you tell when a company is greenwashing? And then watching that conversation evolve into like, well, what can we do about greenwashing, given that sustainability is such an urgent and important question? So I'm really honored to be able to talk to all of you about these important issues. And I'm really excited also to hear from Corey and Hilary and to hear their expertise when it comes to all these issues.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Hilary, do you have some thoughts to share?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you again for having me here this evening. I've gotten to know our moderators here a little bit over the last couple of weeks, and then obviously Corey and Elizabeth I've gotten to know quite well over the last few weeks, months, and years. Although a lot of it has all been over Zoom, I do feel like we're pretty connected. So it's been a bright spot of this lockdown. I feel like I'm actually getting out of my basement a little bit, even though I'm still in the basement. So thank you for this opportunity. I look forward to hearing questions from folks tonight and your thoughts on there's so many different aspects of this topic. So Sean, I was particularly interested to hear when you talked about your curriculum for the semester, for the quarter, you know, focusing on different aspects of sustainability. And I think that's so important that people realize this is a comprehensive issue. It's not just one particular thing. Sustainability takes in environmental impacts, you know, the chemicals that are used, the water that is used, the materials that are used, the impact to the earth because of that. But it also takes in the labor rights issue and the human component of making the clothes. That the folks who make them, they need to be in a sustainable, healthy, safe work environment. I know that's something Elizabeth has been focusing on a lot recently as well. So I look forward to the conversation tonight and discussing the comprehensive aspects of sustainability. So thank you for having me here tonight.
Great, thank you so much. And Corey, your thoughts?
Yeah, first I just want to say thank you to everybody who's here. Thank you for having us. I mean, from my perspective, I'm extremely humbled, because if you're being in sustainable fashion space for quite some time, and being able to be on a panel with someone like Elizabeth and with Hilary it's pretty major in my world. So that's a big honor. And also I'm super excited because students are, I think, some of the most important people in the world, and they usually don't know it, or they don't give themselves the credit. So this is actually really important. That you feel passionate about this at all is extremely heartening. And the idea that you guys put together this program, and like you mentioned, Eli, that this isn't in the curriculum yet, but the fact that there's so much interest around it. And I've had this conversation lately with a project me and Hilary have been working on, just this intense interest and like this kind of human passion towards this thing. I think it's important. And the other thing I wanted to mention, or just say, which Hilary has already touched on, Elizabeth as well, is just the sustainability, especially in the fashion space, and I'm sure we'll talk about it. It often sort of always gets wrapped up in the environmental component, but that is only one dimension of the components. I think the sustainable development dimensions are environmental, social, and economic, and they're all the same bigness. And if those things in balance is what creates sustainability. So I'm sure we'll get deeper into it, but yeah, I'm very excited, and thank you again.
Fantastic. Well, we've had the opportunity to ask our students to provide some questions already, and I know that Eli has had a chance to look at some of those and is pulling out some of the more salient ones. Do you have a question maybe that we can pose to the panelists, Eli?
There are so many terrific questions, students. You have knocked yourselves out here, making really provocative questions for these folks. And I am going to read one or two questions here, but I would absolutely love it if you all feel inspired to share your questions in real time in the chat. We'll be happy to kind of call them up, or if you have a question that you want to ask straight away. But I thought that I don't know, there's a lot of the students have broken down their questions for the individual presenters, like, directing a question at one person or another. But one of the questions here that I really like, and I don't know if this would be a good place to start, sort of focusing in on labor relations and kind of how do we go forward in labor relations? And, labor relations are really important to many students, and it's come up in several of the questions, but I'm kind of hodgepodging together a few questions here. But the question is sort of, how does one balance domestic policy around labor, right, with the fact that so many of our garments and clothes are manufactured outside the borders of the US? And a piece of this question kind of then spirals off to this other place of like, can you imagine a time in which we might develop a sort of global standard of labor practice, and maybe some sort of a third party certification process, or I don't know. So is that something any of you have ever thought of? And how might something like that work to allow labor practices to transcend national boundaries?
I'm happy to take the first stab at that. There's a lot to unpack there. Maybe just to start, a lot of my recent work has focused on garment workers and labor rights in the apparel supply chain. So that would be people who are working in cut and sew factories. And Eli, as your question hinted at, oftentimes, those are people working in countries. Most clothes sold in the United States now are made in Asia. So, they might be made in China, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Taiwan. But there is a substantial amount of clothing manufactured in the United States still, in New York and Los Angeles, and scattered in little pockets here and there. And then there's some production in the UK and Italy. But yeah, the vast majority of it is outsourced. And so there's kind of two, well, okay, before I get to potentially like solutions or third-party certifications, it is true that, you know, over the last 20 to 30 years, like during this period of outsourced production, the working conditions in garment factories have been very poor. Like wages remain very low on average. There are exceptions, of course, like there are wonderful ethical factories. But for the most part, you know, wages are low. And in fact, they've remained mostly stagnant in a lot of Asian production countries over the last 20 years. So profits for brands have increased exponentially, but you still see workers being paid very little. So that kind of gets to like, what can we do about this? And oftentimes, I'll hear the conversation kind of move towards like, maybe the solution should be to onshore and bring everything back to the United States. But I am of the opinion that the reason why working conditions in the fashion industry, and in particular in cut and sew factories, remain kind of paltry is not because of where these factories are located, but it's because there is no liability between brands and factories. So the system has separated the workers from the companies that are actually manufacturing the clothes. It's actually, in my mind, not that different than like Uber's business model, where they'll say, you know, these aren't really our employees. We don't really have any responsibility for them. And it's taken 20 years to actually prove this out, but we know now that brand purchasing practices, how much they pay for their clothes when they place an order in a factory, how quickly they need the product turned around, like those decisions have a huge, huge impact on working conditions. So what's happening now, the long and short of it, is that there are finally novel pieces of legislation and regulation that are coming out to just fix this loophole. There's a really cool bill in California called the Garment Worker Protection Act that's increasing, one, it's setting a minimum wage for garment workers, but also just creating shared liability. I know I'm going super into the weeds, but I think, I hope you guys are just hanging on with me. And also shared liability between factories and brands. And then there's also supply chain regulation in Europe that's being drafted called mandatory human rights due diligence. And those are just two examples. But what I'm seeing is like a move away from like a completely deregulated fashion industry where no one is responsible for garment workers, back towards some shared mutual responsibility.
Mm. That's really interesting. And just to stay there for just one moment, I think what's interesting is you're talking a lot there about sort of top-down control or regulation on industries. And since we have Hilary here, who can sort of speak to that, I think, and we also have Corey coming at it from a brand perspective. It's interesting to think about, you know, when we talk about carrots and sticks frequently in our field. We have, in the case of regulation, sort of a stick, but then, you know, there's also the bottom-up approach where consumers and brands can work in ways to sort of incentivize those changes too. And I'm curious from either Hilary or Corey's perspective, if which do you see working better, or do you see a combination? Are we talking about top-down or bottom-up, or is it something that where regulation is needed, as Elizabeth says, or do we need more brands seeing the value in this and consumers seeing the value?
I'll jump in here for a second. I think it's almost, they have to go hand in hand, right? I mean, you need the drive from the consumer base to say that this is something that's important, and that's going to resonate with good actors, you know, like Corey's company, you know, that want to do the right thing. They know it's important to their customers, and will do that. But you also need the regulation side as well. One, to sort of level the playing field, bring everyone to the table and realize these are the standards that have to be met. No, it's not okay to cut corners here and to pay below a living wage, or to use harsh chemicals, or to, you know, not ensure a safe work environment. You need that that baseline that helps to protect against bad actors who are coming into the field, and helps to boost the good actors as well, in promoting what they're doing and setting the standard for what happens. So you absolutely need both. And I think we're seeing an increase in both right now. We see consumers really valuing, they want their ethics and their morals to be reflected in their purchasing power. And you see regulators noticing that there is a problem, right? This isn't something we can put under the table anymore. I think the pandemic has highlighted that a lot. Elizabeth talked about the supply chain issue. We've seen the problems when we don't have a well-regulated supply chain. We couldn't get PPE products in that we so desperately needed this past year. We didn't know where they were coming from, how they were manufactured, what were the standards. And that sort of exposure to the issue and focus on it will be important for PPE production, but also for the other items that are made in factories too. The same we saw in New York when there was a call for more PPE, that it was the small garment factories in New York who were stepping up to the plate and making these products. So it's the same factories, it's the same workers in many cases who are making your masks or making the shirt that I have on. So if we can put in some good standards and oversight into how we regulate this and how we look at the supply chain, it's going to benefit the whole industry.
Yeah. Corey, you have thoughts to add?
Yeah, I mean, there's this, there's so much to kind of talk about, but I guess I would say that I agree that there's like a lot of things that that are happening at once, that they're just starting to happen at once, and that business is always the bad guy in the room, and for good reason, I think, because it's not to a business's benefit to not go where there isn't money. It's just not how a business doesn't survive that way. A business survives by making money. And what happens when you start to sort of try to take sustainability messaging and understanding is that we have this huge greenwashing issue basically come down on our heads, because you see a trend, a really significant social trend towards people wanting it. And then you have businesses whose survival is and some of them are not good. Some of them are trying to be good, but they're all using similar messaging because no one really understands necessarily. The layman consumer doesn't understand. They have good intentions, but don't necessarily know the complexities of the fashion supply chain. And like Elizabeth mentioned, she was just talking about the cut and sew phase of supply chain. It's a massive, huge, globally connected thing. Even the simplest pair of jeans has been through multiple countries and marketplaces, and even the bits and bobs on the jeans have been sourced from even more places. So it's an insane supply chain. So two things I wanted to say. One thing is, because of the way business operates, there has to be government oversight. It just has to happen from our perspective, simply because if there's a way for a business to make money legally, to do something and make more money, it will do it. It's just the way the market works. So there has to be regulation. The second part is the social movements, like the movements that Elizabeth has been a part of and promoted. Those are massive. Those are what gear people and educate consumers on these issues. From a business perspective, it's both like engaging like I would say a common sense morality, or like a common sense ethical space, but also kind of betting that those two things will happen. Both betting that regulation will happen, and also that the passion of the students in this seminar, and that these leaders and these social movements continue to educate consumers. And if you're a business really trying to do good things, that you can show that you're doing that. And that's also why I wanted to kind of reinforce this transparency element, because we're going to talk about sustainability, and sustainability is sort of the umbrella word, which I know has a lot of problems essentially right now. But transparency for our company, at least right now, is sort of like, we believe it's like the next step in this movement, because it's essentially trying to show you what we're doing, both good and what could be better, because of the nature of how the system works, So that's really where we sit. We're sort of like sustainability is the baseline, sustainability or a sustainable, I would say, responsible sourcing and production is the baseline. And then educating the consumer on what all of this complex stuff is so that we can kind of make the next move together, you know? That's,
Yeah.
I'll leave it there before I get more confused.
No, that's fantastic. No, it's really interesting to hear your various perspectives.
But
Well,
I think
Eli,
that,
go ahead.
yeah, while you were talking, you must have struck a nerve because like 3 or 4 hands went straight up in the air. So Josh has been really patient with his hand up for kind of the longest. And then we'll kind of just go down the line here as we have time to Amy and then to Catherine. So I don't know if I'm saying your name right. Josh, do you wanna give us your question?
Yeah, I totally do. Can everybody hear me okay?
Great.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, my question is just directed towards Corey. I was looking over the AMENDI site and you guys wrote a letter to the FTC or the Federal Trade Commission. And I'm wondering whether or not you guys have heard back from the Federal Trade Commission, especially about those green guides that were deliberated in 2012.
That's a great question. And actually, Hilary should answer this question because she wrote the letter to the green guides. And I just wanted to promote the hell out of it with her. So I'm going to leave her to do it. And so you guys know the status.
Corey's done more than promote the hell out of it. He has been a great partner in this process and finding allies to sign on to this letter. So just by way of background for folks on the call briefly, yes, we have crafted a letter to the FTC, which is the Federal Trade Commission, asking them to look at and reevaluate what's called the green guides. And the green guides are federal regulation that are designed to assist businesses in making lawful environmental claims about their products and also helping consumers to understand what these claims mean. So when you look at them, you can see their examples of if you want to say something is compostable, okay, you can say that if X, Y, and Z has happened, things like that. So the last time they were updated was in 2012. They were originally produced in 1992. And so we are calling on them to review these guides because so much has changed in 9 years, both in terms of technology and also in terms of consumer behavior. And so our letter doesn't presuppose an outcome. We're not saying change X, change Y. We're saying, hey, the time is right. There's interest from consumers and we have a new administration. We have a new Congress. Let's sit down, bring everyone to the table and start having this conversation. And the last time they were reviewed, it was a 2-year process, and that's fine. You know, that's what it takes sometimes to get the right kind of buy-in from everybody, but let's not waste any time. Let's get started now. So we have the letter. We are still soliciting signers to this letter. We have not delivered it yet. Our goal is to get it out to them this month. And so that's sort of the status of where we are now.
Fantastic.
And we're looking to have a broad spectrum of folks on the letter. You know, we want representatives from brands like with Corey. We want individual experts like Elizabeth and also activist organizations as well. So really get a broad spectrum of support. And then we'll probably also be doing some sort of maybe a change.org petition or things like that so we can get more consumers and individuals to also be able to weigh in.
And Hilary, just to chime in here, is there a way that the rest of us could be kept up to date on the status of that? Is there a way to track that?
So absolutely. I'll be posting updates on our website, PoliticallyInFashion.com. And I know Corey's been posting things on their website as well. So yeah, definitely be looking for updates on that in the coming month.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Wow, that is so exciting. That's such a wonderful thing to learn more about, and I'm glad to hear the current state. Amy, do you want to chime in here with the question that you have for our panelists?
Yeah, just want to thank the panelists again for being here today. And for Hilary, I actually looked at the green guides for a little bit, and I was wondering if you could go into a little detail about how that might look like for smaller businesses, because I'm assuming that it might not be entirely fair to hold them to the same standards, or maybe it is.
Actually, I'll probably let Corey talk a little bit about this as an actual practitioner in the space, but I think they are designed to be pretty broad standards. We're not saying they're not saying they have to have X number of dollars spent. You're not saying you have to do X, Y, and Z. It's just saying if you make a claim on something, you may not choose to make a claim. That's fine. But if you're going to say that your product does X, you need to somehow be able to back it up with Y. Because without that, it loses meaning for consumers. For example, if you say something's recyclable, you think, okay, that means I can go take this item and put it in a recycling bin at the store or in my neighborhood or something like that. But if it turns out it's made with something that can only be recycled at one plant in some small town in Minnesota, the majority of the country is not going to be able to take part in that. That's not really saying your product's recyclable, right? So it's making sure that these claims are reflective of something that is meaningful and impactful to consumers. But there's no burden on people. If you choose not to make a claim, that's fine. But if you are, it has to be something that's meaningful and impactful to folks. And I think that brings in the question of, what does sustainability mean? When the Green Guides were last updated in 2012, the FTC affirmatively said they were not going to touch that term. They didn't think they had enough input from folks or interest on the issue. And that may very well be the case. But again, 9 years later, we're seeing the use of that word so much. And again, while we don't presuppose an outcome in the letter, I would say that that's something we should be looking at, putting some sort of guardrails on what this term is, not necessarily a hard and fast definition. I mean, you look in 3 different dictionaries, you'll get 3 different definitions of the word, but maybe there's some factors that need to be taken into consideration if you're going to say your product is, quote, sustainable. And it's people who are involved in the industry who can make those determinations and make that kind of input and figure out what works and what would not work.
Yeah, interesting. Hey, Corey, do you have anything to add since as a practitioner that would influence you?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I guess I would say that it kind of depends when you say small, small business, what exactly that means, and also what kind of small business you are. But I also understand any sort of hesitation to just sort of blanket regulate or sort of, let's trust the government to do this perfectly. But I think that what's important for a brand like ours, which is small, is the idea that when we say something, because we're trying to appeal to a certain demographic who cares about these issues, when we say something, that our language can be taken honestly and seriously in the marketplace, where another brand who has way more power can say the same exact thing and have nothing to lose. That's where it becomes problematic, because let's just say there's a monstrous, huge Swedish company that can say certain things. There's like Elizabeth said, there's no liability for them. There's a blissful ignorance in that. I'm not saying anything about those intentions of those companies, but I am saying that right now they can take total advantage of that marketing language, and that is not a fair playing field. And one thing about the FTC from a business perspective, this is actually really important. The FTC is meant to do 2 things: protect consumers from false advertising, and reinforce anti-trade laws. And they're also supposed to promote fair competition between businesses. So from a business perspective, it's actually really important. They should be enforcing things. This is our perspective. They should be enforcing this issue, because now the sustainability is such a huge marketing thing. So many companies are coming in and using the language willy-nilly. Now it's time to have some guardrails, like Hilary's mentioned. That's how we look at it.
I think we're sort of at the tipping point on this because of the growth, the exponential growth and the use of the word sustainable. I think we're at a point where if people start, I think the worst case scenario is consumers start to see sustainable, but you think, oh, yeah, but this other company, I remember what they did. They said it was sustainable and it turns out it was horrible. And you start to see a lot of examples of that. You're just gonna be like, you know what? Forget it. Sustainability doesn't mean anything. I'm just going to buy what I want to buy or go for the right price. That's just, cheap marketing trick. It doesn't actually say anything. And that would be a real shame, because this is something that is reflective of people's values, and you want to promote that. Let's not lose this opportunity. Let's sort of take back this word and make sure that it can be used in an appropriate, meaningful way for both businesses and consumers.
Oh, yeah, that's
Yeah.
great.
Wow, this is
Well,
such a fun. Sorry, Sean.
Yeah. Oh, no. I totally understand what you're saying. That sort of the pollution and dilution of the word is meaningful. Elizabeth, I saw that you unmuted yourself. Did you have something you wanted to add?
Oh, I was actually going to say something similar to what Hilary is saying, that I see a backlash happening where you see more people saying, well, nothing's sustainable. Fashion can't be sustainable. And I think that it partly comes from an exhaustion. There's just an overwhelming amount of messaging out in the marketplace. I wrote an article for Patagonia a few months back about greenwashing, and I described my own Instagram feed, as someone who searches for topics related to ethics and sustainability. Everything, all of the ads that I receive are companies that say, like, this shirt will solve climate change, like really pretty bold claims. And as Hilary said, I think that we're reaching sort of a tipping point with it, which we don't want to happen. And I think it's super interesting what Corey said about this is another case where better enforcement of the rules could help level the playing field, because what you don't want is a business that's doing things right to lose market share to people who are overselling their claims.
Well, I was just going to chime in that as a certified organic farmer, we have this, stamp. I don't like everything that is going into that stamp, but I think consumers really trust the idea of that. And there is nothing like it really for the industry for the fashion industry. And it's really cool conversation to wade into. I'm curious, Catherine, if you want to kind of lead us away into a different conversation.
Yes, hello. Thank you so much for being here, everybody. I think my question will lend itself well to Corey, but I would love to hear input from any of our panelists. My question was, within the sustainable fashion industry and like amongst sustainable brands, have there been conversations about how to improve the accessibility of sustainable fashion? Many people either cannot or like aren't willing to pay $200 plus on a garment, even if they want to support sustainable companies and believe in those values. Is price like considered a barrier to sustainable fashion becoming more widely embraced, and how do you guys see that being resolved? Thank you.
Great question. I would say that fashion is a funny business because it is one of those businesses where there's a psychological game at play a lot of the times. It's not necessarily pure function. So luxury, for instance, luxury fashion, I'm using that blanket term, but it's priced in such a way that you psychologically believe that it is worth more simply because it costs more. That has nothing to do with how it was made or what products are put into it, although in general, they're usually made better. But there's plenty of examples of super expensive garments which are not sustainable or not good. For sustainable fashion, it's funny because, and this is always the quagmire of entering into the sustainable fashion world, because if you're a fashion company, then you're wading into this psychological marketing place where it's like, how do you stay cool but not be cheap? If you're a sustainable brand, does that mean you can actually be fashionable, or you're supposed to be just functional? Because is fashion and not sustainable because it's not functional? And then the other question is, beyond all that, let's just say I've said that. Beyond all that, if you're going to do a sustainable supply chain and try to source sustainable, try to source responsibly, those things naturally cost more, mainly because there's not a higher demand. So it's just more expensive to access them. Plus, you're usually, if you're in a healthy supply chain, you're probably paying your workers more. You're probably working with people who have certifications. Those cost money actually, and some of them are not cheap. So those things all start to kind of move into a cost. There are some brands, there's a shoe brand, Veja, which I really like, who I believe is also sort of, they're sort of doing this thing where it's like a function cool mix, sustainable like messaging, where it's like, this shoe is under $100, but we're able to access these pretty good supply chains and do that stuff. That's pretty strong. Or that's one example. Maybe a holy grail is to say like, okay, you know, a sustainable t-shirt, is there any way we can get it cheaper than as cheap as a Hanes t-shirt or, you know, an H&M t-shirt? I would say it shouldn't ever be. I would say that a t-shirt maybe never should have been $5. I mean, the amount of resources it takes to actually manufacture, grow the cotton, you know, process the cotton, mill it, turn it into fabric, and then create it. I'm not sure that should ever be cheap, but it should be accessible. Where the accessibility line lies, that goes into the social and economic sustainability sector. Because those things are out of balance, it's hard to say what pricing is actually fair in the long run if, say, the entire system becomes more sustainable. But to answer your question more straightforward, I would say that as businesses, as this goes the way we think it will go, where people are more interested in sustainable, responsible fashion, and as more brands either are forced to change, or guys with the marketplace becomes fair, and guys hopefully like us can perform better, that we are able to lower our prices to broaden our access. In the meantime, I would say thrift. Great thrifters out there right now, and you can get it for a good price.
I would love to add to that as well. I can only imagine what it's like being a sustainable brand and having to balance all of these various demands. I think that one thing that I wanted to add is that currently, especially for the really big fashion companies, I like using this statistic, but 97% of the profits in the fashion industry are controlled by just 20 companies. And when you look at the way their business model operates, they externalize all of the environmental costs and the labor costs. So you're not actually paying the factory in the country where that product is being produced is paying the cost for that product. I will give a concrete example. I was just having a conversation with a factory in Bangladesh the other day, and they were saying that they were making clothes below the cost of production because the big brands were asking them to increase their sustainability compliance, so make changes to their factory to be more sustainable, but then the brand was not paying them to make those changes. So right now we've created this, you know, huge corporate fashion system where no one on the big brand side is really investing in sustainability and ethics. I think that that is one of the main reasons why ethical and truly ethical and sustainable small companies are not able to scale, right? Because I would prefer to see those huge companies shrink or become less powerful, and then make it so that companies like Corey's are better able to succeed and grow and fill that sort of like middle tier space where you have like a bigger scale where prices, I'm just like theorizing, Corey, and you're probably gonna be like, that won't work for this or that reason. But like, I mean, part of the issue with smaller ethical and sustainable brands is like, they're not making 40,000 units of something. Like, I mean, H&M will sometimes make millions of units of a single product. So at that point, you can make something for $1 per unit, but at what cost to the planet? And then I will also conclude with saying what I think a lot of people say, which is like, thrifting and resale is obviously like one of the best inroads into sustainable fashion. And it's in particular, I think, like what I see a lot of young people embracing is like you don't have to go out and buy that expensive organic top. You can buy something secondhand.
Yeah, fantastic.
And this may be getting slightly off topic, but I'll just add that we have to change the culture too about consumption, that you don't need the volume. And Elizabeth goes into this quite a bit in her book, the idea of, you don't need 50 pairs of jeans or 75 t-shirts. Now, I'm in no way in the no new clothes camp either. I mean, that doesn't work well for business. Fashion is an industry. I think it's really important to remember that this isn't a charitable group. This is an industry, and should be treated as such. But as consumers, we need to sort of reprioritize our values and what we're putting our money to. And we all have a finite amount of what we can spend, and to maybe not buy $23 t-shirts, right? And to put your money into, one or two products that's made ethically, made stronger, made better. So maybe getting a little off topic, but I think it's an important mind shift that folks need to be thinking about.
No, I totally agree. I think one thing that's so interesting is, the price of clothing is lower than it ever has been in human history. So even just our concept of what a cheap piece of clothing versus an expensive piece of clothing has changed a lot, certainly in my lifetime. So now, a $5 t-shirt or $5 garment, that would have been like unthinkable a generation ago. So, and it certainly has changed everything about our consumer culture, like having access to those low priced fast fashion garments.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add one last thing, which is that I would say in general, the last bits of this conversation, first of all, I think it would work, Elizabeth. I think that's probably the way it would happen. Ideally, is that you wouldn't have like the big guys sort of say they're shifting or try to shift. I think it's probably impossible for them in many ways. But I would say this is usually when this conversation starts. This is when the business guys shrink away in fear too, because it basically what we're saying is shrinking consumerism, which is scary I'm not scared of it. I'm in that camp because you're sort of in this. I just wanted to say that, as a brand in the sustainable space, you sort of have to have faith that yes, there should be less consumption, and when you do consume, please buy this, please buy this, basically, yes, sort of like running into this shrinking space. But I think that's the messaging that I know is getting to the tops of a lot of these corporations. They know this is sort of on the horizon. They know this is, there's people out there who are passionate about this. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
Well, actually, someone just asked what we think about no new clothes and consuming less is the most sustainable option, which is like so connected to what you're saying. Because I think that there's like a lot of space between what the fast fashion industry and the mass market retailers are doing and, only buying 5 things a year. Like right now, there's a lot of waste built into the fast fashion industry. So like, let's say out of that 2 million pairs of jeans that gets manufactured, a third is probably just never going to sell and it will end up as dead stock and will be shredded. Maybe another third is sold at full price and people actually enjoy it and wear it. And then another third, maybe they buy it and wear it once and throw it away. Like there's just like so much waste built into the system that doesn't even have to do with consumers participating in like where it wants culture, that's like completely like hidden from us. So I kind of see the minimalist thing. I think some people really enjoy it, but on the other hand, like that's not necessarily like what I'm suggesting. Like I think that there's a lot of room to make the fashion industry dramatically more sustainable without asking people to make some huge change. First of all, like going back to what you were saying, Corey, in earlier, like because fashion is not a necessity, often these conversations about sustainability tip into like asceticism or like making people feel bad because they want to buy something beautiful and new. And we don't want to do that either. Like clothing is fun. Like I think people should enjoy buying it. Yeah, those are just some thoughts.
Wow, this is so great. I wish this seminar was 2 hours long.
I was just thinking the same thing as our clock is ticking down.
Sean, what's your thought? Should we have one more question? And then we want to close with a question that we think is really important for our students, which really is hinging around you all just sharing briefly, like your journey, like how did you get where you are now? And like, there are a lot of the questions that I've been reading come into that, like, oh, how did you become interested? How did you know this was a thing you wanted to do with your life? So that's a question. We don't want to let you guys go without answering. Sean, should we have one more question from students or?
Well, yeah, I mean, Emma's had her hand up for quite a while. Maybe we could just throw that in the mix.
All right, so we're gonna have Emma's question, then we'll circle back to your all of you sharing your life journey. Emma, you're on.
Hi, thank you. I'm super excited that you all are here, and it's been awesome to hear your different opinions on sustainable fashion. I have a question that I think the people in the chat will be happy about because it's similar to that. And a solution that we've been talking about and that I personally use a lot is thrifting, but it's problematic for different reasons, especially what I'm interested in is like when higher income people shop in thrift shops that are meant for lower income people and either resell those items that are like considered the most fashionable or trendy, or because it's becoming more popular, prices in thrift shops and secondhand stores get higher and it becomes less accessible for the people that really need it. So I was wondering what your guys' opinions were on like the ethics of thrifting. And then also people are saying in the chat about different body types it's not accessible for them. So yeah, I was just wondering your thoughts on that.
I can take the the part about buying ASOS and Fashion Nova. Like, I really am of the opinion that there should not be such a thing as an unethical and unsustainable company. Like, that is part of why a lot of my work is currently focused on reforming these huge companies that, quite frankly, most Americans buy most of their wardrobe from. Like I was saying, 20 brands control 97% of the fashion industry. And I really hope that in the not so distant future, that as an ASOS consumer and a Fashion Nova consumer, you can buy those items that fit your body, that you enjoy, that are more responsibly made. Like, maybe they're not going to be the most sustainably made product ever. But as a consumer, I don't think that you should have to worry that you're buying something that was made out of forced labor. Like, this goes back to, I think it's a consumer right issue. Like, we have a right to shop in any store in this country where there's a certain standard of ethics and sustainability. With the thrifting question, the one thing I'll say about that is I've done a lot of research on the secondhand supply chain, and I see the question from a slightly different angle, just because I've done a lot of research in the secondhand markets in Nairobi. And I see where all of the stuff that doesn't sell in the United States ends up. And there's just such an overwhelming amount of used clothing in circulation, high quality, medium quality, and low quality, that I guess I do know that this has become, that this is something that people are debating, but I do know that there's also an overwhelming amount of secondhand and used clothes in the United States. And a lot of it just gets shipped overseas and is landfilled somewhere else.
Yeah, I'm really glad this came up, because I was just talking with Liz Ricketts from the OR Foundation, which I'm sure Elizabeth is familiar with. I know Hilary's familiar with too. But if you guys want to like get really, I want to say it's going to make you really sad, probably, but it's super important. But if you want to understand this general global fashion supply chain, this is the very end of the supply chain. Is you go and check out the secondhand markets in Ghana and Nairobi and in different parts of Africa, where used garments that don't sell, that we don't see on Depop and we don't see curated on our Instagram by these great curators, where the secondhand ASOS and the secondhand H&M goes. It goes to these places, and it's I think it's something like, I know the Contamonto market's 15 million pieces a week is shipped there through containers, Gap, Nike, H&M, Adidas, you'll find it all there. And they're actually, like Elizabeth mentioned, it's from high quality to low quality. So I think it's a part of it has to do with access. I mean, guys going into thrift shops and then, taking them and selling them, that's the market doing what it's going to do. If the market shows there's money to be made, it's going to move in that direction. From the ethical side of it, my first pair of jeans was from the Salvation Army, a pair of Oshkosh. They had the stretchy ones like AC Slater. They had I bought them for $3 and there was $5 in the pocket. So I'll always remember my first pair of jeans from Salvation Army. So it's something close to my heart too. The idea that my family had to go to thrift shops to buy clothes for me, and I think that still should be something that it should be accessible for everyone. How you combat that, I'm not sure. But I would say whatever's happening to these goods from ASOS and H&M, and they're just being shipped over because it's actually easier for them to get rid of them this way, is maybe part of this problem. Yeah, I think that was it. That's all I need to say.
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating area, and Emma, thank you for raising the question. I've heard it come up a fair amount just in the last couple of months in conversations, the ethics surrounding this, and it's things, some of which I thought of before and some of which I had not. And you could probably do a whole separate presentation on the ethics of this. And I'd certainly be interested in hearing about that and learning more, because I've thought about that for thrift stores, like, right, is it appropriate for me to go in there? I can't afford to buy a $40 pair of jeans. Should I go buy a $10 pair of jeans? And then someone says, well, but the money goes to benefit the charity that the shop is set up for. I also was on a panel with a woman one time who said, I grew up in a family and a culture where it was a real point of pride when my dad could pay for us to get new clothes. And it would be almost insulting for them to go to, it was a point of pride for him to be able to buy it. And so he didn't want to have to go to a thrift store. And now as an adult, she feels weird going to do that. So there are all sorts of factors that come into play that I think, we need to be sensitive to everyone's personal story and cultural background, and then the international aspect of where some of these items end up too. So it's a really great topic that I think people should definitely discuss and explore more. There's a lot there.
Wow, y'all, this conversation has been fantastic, and it continues to be fantastic. And I'm realizing though that we have reached the end of our regular time, and there are just two things that I want to do. First of all, I want to make sure that we thank you all for being here today. So thank you to our panel. Big round of applause to you all. I'm going to go ahead and just close out the Zoom. Close out the YouTube now, because we've gone over our time. But I do think that it's great if we could continue the conversation around your career paths, maybe with our students, that would be great to do that. Now, I do want to say for folks on YouTube, please tune in next week for our next discussion, and check out the Program on the Environment's webpage to learn more about our upcoming seminars in the series. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit the notifications button, and you'll be notified the next time we go live. And with that, I will say to folks joining us online, thank you very much, and we will see you all next week. So I'm going to